If you're entering your third year of medical school, you've likely just finished your USMLE Step 1 and or your COMLEX Level 1. But now you've got a bigger beast to tame. And that's gonna be the USMLE Step 2 CK and the COMLEX Level 2. Dr. Shaq, welcome back to another video. This video is for my rising third year medical students, but if you're not one of those, just try to enjoy. So this video is gonna be a little bit longer because of how important the USMLE Step 2 and the COMLEX Level 2 really are, especially for your residency applications. Here are some timestamps, but I've also placed them in the description below. Let's get into this. I think it's important to really talk about what actually helps when it comes to mastering USMLE Step 2 and COMLEX Level 2. Also, a lot of the things that I'm saying apply to largely both exams. So whenever I talk about Step 2, a lot of the advice that I'm giving is also going to be applicable to the COMLEX Level 2. There are a lot of YouTube videos out there at your disposal as to how to properly study for this exam. In terms of what study habits to do for your pre-dedicated period. So pre-dedicated period just means that it's a time where you're during your rotations, you're attending your rotations, you're also studying on the side for whatever rotation that you're on. So this could be pediatrics, OBGYN, general surgery, medicine, psychiatry. Now in those YouTube videos, they discuss many things. It can be Anki, it can be keeping a notebook about the things that are the most weakest for you, or developing like a full-blown schematic sheet. I'm gonna be honest with you, the way I studied in my third year of medical school, I was pretty inefficient with the way I went about the content. I would take notes excessively on U-World questions that I did, and I would unsuspend a lot of Anki cards from that big Anking deck, or even make more cards that's covering the same information multiple times. I would also spend a lot of time watching videos on test taking strategies for both exams, but that didn't actually help me on my weakest areas of knowledge. Don't fall into this trap of looking at test taking strategies for the USMLE Step 2 before you have a strong foundation. You need to have a strong foundation first before you get into test taking strategies. I would focus on mastering as much content as you possibly can so that you have a good foundation for your dedicated period of studying. And this is admittedly hard in your third year because you have two full-time jobs essentially. You have a full-time job of attending your rotations, and you have a full-time job of studying whenever you can. And fitting the time to get that much studying in is especially difficult in very demanding rotations like general surgery and medicine, or even OB-GYN. So here's the solution. I would stick to one study method and not multiple. If you prefer taking notes of all the things that you got wrong while doing your URL, that's fine. Just know that it takes a lot of time to write stuff down. Also, you have to revisit the notes that you took. So you have to flip through the notebook to read whatever you wrote down, and then reread, and then reread. Because you want to make sure that you learn the information that you were weakest on so that it sticks with you during your dedicated period of studying. So in that case, what I should have done was use Anki instead of writing notes. Because Anki, at least you have it in your computer. You can kind of do it wherever you want. I figured a different study habit would help me in terms of mastering content, but I did Anki in my first 2 years of medical school, and I should have stuck with that in my third year of medical school. But it's your call, you can pick whatever you want. Once you've figured out how to study, take your month-end exams seriously. So this, for any MD student, this would be your NBMEs. For any DO students, it's likely gonna be your COMATs. I would prepare for these seriously because those grades will determine what you get on your overall rotation, and you want strong clerkship grades for your residency applications. And two, it's understanding the logic of these test writers, particularly for the NBME exam, because the NBME test writers are the ones that are writing your step. A lot of my DO classmates took NBME exams, and they were very prepared for their dedicated period of studying, and they actually did score very highly on those exams. Next, I wanted to talk about what test-taking strategies and tips helped me on test day, and test-taking strategies that I've noticed that other people who scored a lot higher than I did on their test day. Like I mentioned before, test-taking strategies are something that you should focus on your dedicated period, and assuming you've developed a stronger foundation since completing your clerkships. Your dedicated period is usually about a month long, maybe 2 months long after your rotations have finished. And before then, you're expected to learn a lot of information throughout your third year. Focus on doing questions. So if you finish your UWorld question bank, just reset it and do it all over again. Do as many questions as you possibly can. I would also say for level 2, if you have TrueLearn, start ramping up more questions to do, especially for OMM. Doing more questions will, one, allow you to identify your weaknesses that still linger after all this content preparation, and two, allow you to develop those test-taking strategies, which I'm gonna talk about now. So here are a few tips that actually helped me. Test-taking tip number 1, read the last sentence first. This is probably the most classic practical test-taking tip that I would recommend. Before you even read the vignette, if you look at what they're asking, it allows you to bypass all the unnecessary information, because every sentence in the vignette is not equally important. What's happening is that they're having the patient's situation is just a word vomit of information, and you have to parse out the important information so that you can answer the question. Once you know the question, you'll naturally know what to look for because you've practiced so much that you're gonna be able to generate pattern recognition. All right, test taking tip number 2. I would say that you don't need to know every single disease or condition and everything that's associated with those diseases. And every step of like an algorithm, like a clinical management algorithm that you see on UWorld, you don't need to know every single detail for step 2 or complex 2. So if they give you a patient that's in the ICU being managed for something and suddenly he develops like unstable vitals and it's like a best next step in management type of question, you wouldn't pick anything like something conservative, like schedule like a consult with cardiology or something like that. You'd probably give them fluids, or if they have a low blood pressure, pick something with like pressors or something. Even if you don't know what the patient's current problem is, you could probably guess that it's a secondary complication of whatever underlying problem they already had if they discuss it, like if it was like an acute decompensated heart failure. Either way, it's fine because you can eliminate all the conservative answers and pick the more extreme answer because they're very unstable and they need management. You're eliminating answers that you know won't actually help the patient. And by doing so, you're actually improving your chances of getting the question correct. The more severe the condition is, the more invasive or extreme the answer is probably gonna be. Test taking tip number 3. Don't hold answers to different standards. Oftentimes when we're stuck between 2 answer choices, we're not really stuck because we don't know what one of them is. What you're actually doing is looking at one answer choice much more closely than the other answer choice. People who have done a lot of questions and have gone through a lot of content usually know a good amount of information to rule in an answer choice. And that's because you've likely identified 75 to 80 to maybe even 85% of what's happening based on the vignette because you've practiced so much. And then you stumble upon one piece of information that just doesn't fit for whatever reason. So for example, let's say I have a question on rheumatoid arthritis. The classic symptoms are there: morning stiffness that resolves after several hours, blah, blah, blah. And then it says the patient has been sexually active for the past 6 months and the chief complaint that they had was knee pain or like pain in one of the thumb joints. That one detail was put there to see if you would jump to disseminated gonorrhea. And then you go to the answer choice and you pick disseminated gonorrhea. You pick the answer that fits gonorrhea. So like start them on some kind of antibiotic or maybe do like a serology. But because that one thing doesn't fit, you start feeling very unconfident in the actual answer that you have ruled in. The answer that you were trained to deduce this entire time. So you being a perfectionist led to you overthinking what you correctly processed in the first place. It happens all the time to everybody, including myself. But you can't have different standards for different answers. You can't set a high threshold for an answer being correct based on the information that you were able to see in the vignette, and then have a lower threshold for another answer based on that one piece of information. All right, test taking tip number 4, skip the bullshit drug ad questions. Seriously, I don't care how much biostat you actually covered. It mathematically makes less sense to do 3 to 4 questions based on a drug ad that requires like 8 minutes of reading when you can do the remaining 35 to 36 questions with less pressure and more time on your hands. If you see any drug ad questions, which there were plenty on my step 2 exam from last year, I would honestly just save whatever time you have remaining at the end of your block to then address those drug ad questions. Test taking tip number 5, use the exam tools to save your brain power. So I would practice using all the tools that you have that's built into whatever question bank that you're using. The highlight tool, the strike through, and the flag feature. Anytime you see a piece of information that's actually important to answering the question, you highlight it. If you know an answer is definitely wrong and doesn't actually help the patient, strike it through. This keeps you from accidentally coming back to that answer choice and second guessing yourself. If you truly don't know an answer, flag it and move on. Don't let one difficult question eat up all your time when you can be solving 5 other easy questions. One thing I also did on my exam was keep the lab values open throughout the entirety of the exam. This way, that lab sheet will compress the text in the question stem. So instead of staring at a huge wall of text, this psychologically made every question seem that it was always going to be a large amount of text to read in the first place. So that way, when I skip through the questions where all the lab values are not there, each question looked just as long. So instead of thinking, wow, this is a massive amount of text, I honestly would just focus on that one question one at a time. Whether or not you do that, that's specifically up to you. But either way, the other points, like highlight tool, whatever, I would recommend using that as part of the testing interface. The less mental energy you spend navigating the exam software, the more energy you spend on answering questions. Test taking tip number 6, trust your first instinct. Stop changing your answers unless you found like actually new evidence. Towards the end of my preparation, I only changed my answer if I knew that without a doubt the second answer choice that was available was more correct, that was supported by the information in the question stem. If you're stuck 50-50 between 2 answer choices and suddenly you say, Okay, I mean, this might fit better. I want you to stop doing that. Turn that neurotic fucking brain off. Usually your first answer came from pattern recognition. Your second answer comes from anxiety. And the test writers know this. If you're 50-50, commit and move on. People lose an enormous amount of time spent on one question because they just can't seem to pick the right answer. Every question is worth the same. So don't let one confusing answer distract you to the point where you make more mistakes solving easier questions. All right, Step 2 CK is a tough beast. And it doesn't help that the residency programs have placed Step 2 and Level 2 as a large part of your application when applying to their programs. But relax, because hopefully this video has given you some kind of guidance on what to do. And I'm not gonna sugarcoat it because it's gonna take a lot of work, but if you systematically follow what works best for you, whether that's through your study habits or whatever test-taking strategies that you develop over time, you'll honestly be able to do well. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for your support. If you like the content, leave a like and subscribe if you're new. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.